Good morning, everyone. I am Patricia Kogo, the president of European Guanxi, and I will have the pleasure to be the moderator for this event. On this occasion, we will talk about data governance schemes as a competitive tool, and in particular, we will analyze the EU-China case. Our guest speaker for today is Raquel Jorge-Ricart, a Fulbright Fellow at the Elliott School of International Affairs from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where she's specializing in technology and digital policy and its implications on foreign policy and security. Raquel has worked on projects at the Harvard University's Bergham Klein Center for Internet and Society and at the George Washington University's Institute for Science and Technology Policy on data governance, 5G, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity issues related to global order, the EU, cities, industries, and public policy. Raquel is also an associate member at Odisea, the Spanish Observatory on the social and ethical impact of artificial intelligence. Among the last things that she has achieved, I would like to highlight an article on the EU's approach to 5G and the reshaping of transatlantic relations, written with Eline Chivot, Senior Policy Analyst at the Center for Data Innovation and published in the European Leadership Network. And I wanted to highlight this publication because it has caught a lot the attention of the international cyberspace coalitions that work with the United Nations. Moreover, she has recently moderated the session of Geopolitics of Technologies and Communications in the Internet Governance Forum Spain last week with the Secretary of State for Global Spain, the advisor of the UN's Digital Cooperation Roadmap, and think tankers of the Institut Français des Relations Internationales in Paris and from Sweden. She then participated as a speaker in an event organized by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and S Global on technologies at the service of multilateralism, with the general directors of various UN agencies who work on the use of tech for the 2030 agenda. So without further ado, I give you the floor, Raquel. Thank you.
Hi, Patricia. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this really excellent platform. And secondly, thank you all the audience to be here on Saturday, October 31st, this special day today. So today I would like to share with you a really important topic, which sometimes is a little overlooked, but actually it has its relevance because it is we could say that it is a starting point to the rest of developments of technologies such as artificial intelligence, 5G, Internet of Things, blockchain, satellites, which is actually the data governance frameworks and the way in which they are being shaped in each national or regional strategies. So I think that you can all see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so when we talk about data, what actually do we mean? So we could say that data is a collection of facts, numbers, etc. But even more, we could say that data could be understood as a value neutral asset because unless data is converted into information or into knowledge, actually data could be considered as nothing new or as nothing important. But actually it is, because as I said, it is the starting point for the development of all the rest of technologies, and it can really have geopolitical, political, economic, social effects. So when we are seeing what data means, we could consider that data can be seen as a market value, as an asset of economic competition. So for example, you can see here in this screen that the first map refers to the data market value by member states in the European Union, and we can see that the United Kingdom and Germany are, well, the United Kingdom is not now part of the EU, but this map is from last year. But we can see here that the UK and Germany are the European countries with the highest market value of data in Europe. Where, for example, in the case of Italy and Spain, we are one of the lowest. We are one of the countries with the lowest market value. However, on the other side, we see that, for example, in the case of China, while there is no publicly available information on data market value, because I will explain later this, but the data governance framework is mainly concentrated and managed by the government, by the central government, we can see that in the case of China, data flow restrictions are mainly the scenario of data coming from China. So, for example, we can see here that most of the data flow from China are meaningfully restrictive, while, for example, in the case of the EU, more than a half of the data flows are least restrictive. But I will talk on this a bit later on. However, when we are talking about data can be understood, yes, as an economic competitive tool, but actually there are other things. So, for example, we could say about how a country can become powerful in terms of the number of professionals that work on data, or, for example, the skills and the digital capabilities with regards to data by companies, by people, not only professionals working directly on data, but also, for example, all the people. So women, men, even in non-technological works. And also this is highly important in terms of geopolitically when it comes down to see how people in their daily lives, so they are able to use data in a meaningful way and in a safe and stable way. So we can see actually that data is not only a matter of economic or financial perspective, it also has impacts on politics and society. So I would like to narrow this topic down to the idea of data strategies. And we can see that in the case of the EU and China, they have quite interesting data governance frameworks. Why? Because, for example, in the case of the European Union, the EU released in 2018 the General Data Protection Regulation. It was launched in 2016, but it was implemented in 2018, so 2 years later. In the meantime, this year, the EU released its European Data Strategy, what actually means the following. So what the European Union wanted to do with this new European Data Strategy, which actually was released alongside the white paper on artificial intelligence, is to build a data governance mechanism so that the EU wants to create the data markets across sectors. So the EU wants, for example, the energy sector to share data with the educational sector, with the health sector. And actually, they want to make this data interoperable, reused, and replicable. What does this mean? Actually, what it means is that you can use data in no matter which sector, no matter which way, and they want to reuse this data. And for this, one of the most important strategies is to create data pooling and sharing, which is the objective of the European Data Governance Framework. So it has two dimensions. The first one is internal. So internally, the EU wants to foster new fields of innovation. So, for example, by improving the EU's industrial policy, or, for example, by fostering more European 5G corridors. And secondly, externally, what the EU wants to do is to become the norm entrepreneur worldwide and to become a trustworthy power in the rest of the world, so that all countries can trust the way in which the European Union is not only managing data governance, but also the way in which the EU is regulating data, and this has a real impact on data protection. I will take on this a bit later on. In the other case, we have China's case. So China created in 2017 the China Cybersecurity Law, and actually this is a really interesting data governance framework, because actually we see that China's data governance framework is part of its national digital strategy. And at its core, it has three main documents. So the first one, the umbrella document, is this one, the China Cybersecurity Law, created in 2017. But it comes accompanied with other two documents, which are called the measures and the guidelines. So actually the names are a bit longer. So the measures are called Personal Information and Important Data Cross-Border Transfer Security Evaluation Measures, while the third document, which is called the guidelines, it refers to information security technology guidelines for data cross-border transfer security assessment. So this means that actually the Chinese government uses these regulations along with other overlapping and sector-specific laws to govern the processing of personal and non-personal data. So we can see that, for example, so which is the main difference? The European Union has created a sort of bigger framework from which everything is regulated, while in the case of China, it is composed of a patchwork of different documents that try to fill out all the holes that could be necessary to fill out through different documents. And you can see here in this table, I tried to be a bit brief in this regard, but you can see that there are three main differences between the EU's and China's data governance frameworks. So first, with regards to the institutional architecture, we can see that the European Union is working across commissioners and departments. What does this mean? So this means the following. So for example, we have Vestager, which is the vice president for the European Commission for a Europe fit in a digital age and for competition. Also Thierry Breton, which is the commissioner for the single market, is working on data governance. And as well, there are other departments, such as the Department of Innovation, the Department of Technology and Science, and other departments more related to social issues, we could say. They are all working together to try to build up this data governance framework. In the other case, in the case of China, the institutional architecture is mainly centralized in the cyberspace administration of China. So this cyberspace administration of China reports directly to the Central Internet Security and Informatization Leading Group, which in turn is directed by the President Xi Jinping himself. The second point of the differences between the EU and China cases are data protection and data privacy. So we can see that, for example, in the case of the European Union is more oriented to put the focus onto rights. So we can see that in terms of civil liability and the company's liability, the European Union has the General Data Protection Regulation, which kind of centralizes all the minimal and maximum limits in the use of personal and non-personal data. However, in the case of China, we see that data privacy is more centered on the government, and we can see that there is a sort of monopolization in this regard. Monopolization means that actually what the government wants to do is to protect the personal data of citizens from what China considers hackers, terrorists, foreign governments, and companies. And secondly, and this is really interesting, the China's data strategy is government-centric because actually the government wants to prevent their tech companies from becoming too powerful and influential as it happened in the US, so that still the China's government can maintain its well-executed public and private cooperation model. Also in the dimension of data governance. And the third point is with regard to specific principles that all stakeholders need to comply with. So for example, we see that in the case of the European Union tries to put some guarantees when a concrete stakeholder needs to violate the data privacy principles. So there are four main points which need which every stakeholder needs to comply with. So the first one is that processing should be based on clear, precise, and accessible rules. The second point is that necessity and proportionality principles need to be created according to the objectives of the violation of this data privacy point. The third guarantee is that it must have an independent oversight mechanism, and the fourth is that we need effective remedies. On the other side, in the case of China, we see that there are there is a different sort of guarantees. So we see that first of all, there is the data localization requirement, which actually de facto it existed in the early 90s, but it was formalized in the 2017 cybersecurity law. And it means that any business operating within the borders of China should store all personal data of Chinese citizens and other important data on servers located inside the country. So for example, if a certain company needs to transfer data outside the country for business purposes, the government conducts the security assessment, allowing them to do so. And this brings me to the second point, which is security assessment mechanism. So the China security assessment mechanism to use this kind of data privacy framework is really interesting, because actually it is again mainly centralized in the highest spheres of power in the Chinese government, and still in the same way as, for example, the European Union has tried to build up on the minimum and maximum limitations of this use. There are some terms in the case of China which are well specific, while there are other terms which are still a bit vague, we could say. So what does this mean actually? I mean, when we are talking about the EU's and China's data governance frameworks, we find that there are three paradoxes. So the first one is that the focus on data protection makes China be more aligned with the European Union than with the United States. So this doesn't mean that the China's data governance framework is similar in principles and in values to the one in the European Union. What actually this first paradox means is that actually the way in which China and the European Union have constructed a framework itself, institutionally speaking, with regards to data governance is more similar to the case of the United States. The second paradox is that despite the similarities between China and the European Union, the EU still stands with the United States in its position on China and data governance frameworks. And the third paradox is that the United States disputes China's data protection laws through the World Trade Organization for violating free trade agreements. And this is very interesting. And if someone has some question about the United States role in this EU-China's data governance frameworks and relationship, it will be very interesting to talk about it a bit further on. So now we have seen that China and the European Union have these concrete data governance frameworks, but we have talked about it from an internal perspective, we could say. So what does this mean internationally? So for example, in the case of the European Union, we have two main companies, which are Samsung and Nokia, Nokia and Ericsson. And Nokia and Ericsson are Swedish and Finnish companies. And actually we see that, for example, in the case of Nokia and Ericsson, they are two of the three top companies worldwide in the creation of agreements on 5G implementation in other countries, alongside Huawei, which is from China, as you will know. So we see that the European Union in this regard is trying to internationalize its data governance framework by means of companies' implementation of concrete technologies such as 5G, because actually 5G, as the rest of technologies, uses data. On the other side, we have the China's internationalization strategy through the lens of this data governance, and we see that within the Belt and Road Initiative, China has what it calls the Digital Silk Road, and I think that I'm not sure if you can have a very well look at this map because it's very big, but you can see here that, for example, in the case of China, China has created some data centers in Africa, as I will show later on, and as well, for example, China has invested at least $7 billion in fiber optic cable and telecommunications network in Latin America, for example. Or for example, China is investing more than $10 billion for e-commerce and mobile payment deals in Africa and in some areas of Russia. And as well, we can see that China is investing in data centers, in smart and safe city-related projects, at least with several hundred millions of dollars. So actually, this is very important because while it is true that we cannot have access to all the publicly data and information on concrete investments, it is very important to see for now the information that actually is publicly available. So, and for example, in this slide, you can see that China's digital Silk Road has also settled down in Africa. So you can see, for example, that China has promoted smart cities in some areas, especially in East Africa, in the south of Africa. But also China has implemented some data centers. And actually, data centers, when China has released its white paper in 2015, so China said that actually data centers was one of the most important strategic resources for China. And actually, in this white paper from 2015, China remarked that digital connectivity was a top priority. So to conclude, because I prefer to make this webinar a sort of conversation rather than a unilateral speech, so we can conclude with this data competition presentation that actually data is not value neutral, and we see that data is becoming as well a subject of securitization. We have as well to consider data as the starting point. So before looking at the specific technologies and the competition on AI, or for example, on 5G, blockchain, satellite, Internet of Things, we also need to have in mind data, because data is the starting point for the rest of everything. Third, when we are talking about data is not only a matter of regulation, so how we are going to regulate data privacy, data protection, but it is also a matter of economy. So how we can use data as a driver to foster new fields of innovation. For example, in the case of the European Union, we have the European 5G corridors, which try to interconnect different regions from different countries through 5G. But third, data is also a matter of power politics. And for example, in the same way as China has considered data as a top priority in its strategy of internationalization through the Belt and Road Initiative, we have seen that even Josep Borrell, the Vice President of the European Union for Foreign Affairs, he said as well that the European Union needs to learn the language of power, and this means not only to use soft power, but also to use hard power. And actually hard power doesn't necessarily mean military means. And the last point in the conclusions is that it is very important to consider data governance as such, and not just as a little element of the rest of technologies, because the way in which countries will decide on how to use data, on how to implement data, on how to restrict or to shape data governance, this will have greater impacts on the way in which society trusts on institutions, on decision-making processes, and even in the very future of multilateralism. So I would like to conclude this, and thank you very much.
I first want to ask a few questions to Raquel. So first, in one of the recommended readings for today, an article that you wrote for the Elcano Royal Institute titled Digital Tools at Times of Post-Crisis, you talk about a new internet protocol proposal developed by Huawei, which aims at creating a new community of shared future in cyberspace, totally excluded from the existing internet that we know. So my question is, can this proposal bring changes? Can it become an alternative to what we currently have?
Yes, so thank you, Patricia. This is a really interesting question, because actually we see that so internet is promoting a new sort of how we should understand the internet, but also the United States is doing so. So, for example, if we look at the international level, so for example, if we see the United Nations developments on internet governance, we see that there are two main proposals. The first one comes from China and Russia. So they, in 2015, they released a code of conduct for the use of information technologies and telecommunications on the internet. And actually what they promote is a sort of cyber sovereignty. So they say that in the same way as international law respects national borders, internal sovereignty, the cyberspace and concretely the internet should do the same. On the other side, we have the case of the United States. So the United States is promoting another alternative in terms of internet governance. So the United States has aligned with the European Union in this regard, and we see that they are promoting what they call a safe, secure, stable, open internet and cyberspace. And I think that in this regard, the most important point is not only to have a look at how China and Russia are proposing an alternative and how the United States and the EU are doing their side. I think the most important point is to see how the other countries react to these two proposals. So for example, we all know the case of the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And we can see that when China and Russia released this code of conduct on cyber sovereignty, Brazil, India, and South Africa decided to not join or sign up this declaration because they wanted to see how the other alternative was moving forward, right? And for example, we see that in the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, it is as well quite divided because some countries are preferring the alternative of China and Russia, as well because the Belt and Road Initiative from China is spreading across some countries of Latin America. While, for example, we have Chile or Uruguay, which are opting for the US and the EU proposal. In the case of Africa, I think that this will be a really interesting place because, as I showed you, some African countries are collaborating with China in terms of data centers, internet governance, public policy frameworks, how to interconnect the rural and urban areas. While, for example, in other countries in Africa, such as Kenya and Nigeria, we see that US companies such as Microsoft and Google are the most important companies regarding internet building in these countries, we could say. So it's kind of divided.
Vale, fantastic, Raquel, thank you. I have just one more question to ask before we turn to the audience. And it is related to a book that I recently started reading a week ago. Columbia law professor Anu Bradford has recently published a book titled The Brussels Effect, in which she argues that the EU remains an influential superpower that shapes the world in its image. How? Through its ability to set the standards in competition policy, environmental protection, consumer health and safety, the protection of privacy, or online hate speech, just to name a few examples. In other words, the EU possesses a unilateral power to regulate global markets. So EU standards become global standards at the end. In this line, I was wondering, Raquel, if European standards have been transplanted somehow in China in the field of data governance. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, actually, I think that I don't think that necessarily the EU data governance framework has been transplanted into the China's case, because I think that both regions or both frameworks are different, but both are really interesting to see because, well, as I said before, for example, we have, in the case of China, we have a kind of a patchwork of three main documents, and from this point of view, China's government tries to fill out all the holes that it finds over time, while in the case of the European Union has tried to create a more, it's not necessarily cohesive, it's kind of, the European Union has tried to put at the center of the agenda, which are the minimal and maximum limits of data governance. So I think that in this regard, the European Union has worked more on the basis while China has worked more on the top of the issue, I will say. And I will like to adapt to your question that actually I really like this book because I think it was really thoughtful and insightful. But I think that still, even if the European Union can become a model power in terms of regulatory power for data governance, for the internet, etc., I think that still the European Union has to find, if it wants to make its objectives actionable, it has to find still a new line of foreign policy in this regard, because we see that data governance is mainly oriented to competition, single market, which is really important, but as well the foreign policy, so for example the European External Action Service should have in mind the geopolitics of technology, because otherwise the European Union could have a high level of regulations, but still it will need to be competitive, geopolitically talking.
Great, Raquel, thank you. I see that there were some hand emoji questions. Ilaria, can you, would you like, okay, fantastic.
Yes, I have actually many questions, but first, thank you very much, Raquel, for being so exhaustive and presenting this interesting topic to us today. I think that data governance will be increasingly important, and it is important also to know more about how differently you and China deal with data governance. And so I found particularly interesting your explanation about the three paradoxes related to how they are kind of entailed, or there are some analogies and differences. And to respect to this, about this topic, I would like to make this question. How likely is a US-EU engagement in data governance? Whether it is possible, and if there are some boundaries. So to what extent EU and US can cooperate in spite of their differences, and the existence of this paradox you have just mentioned. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you, Ilaria, for this question. I think it is very important to talk about this, because sometimes we think that the United States has a federal data protection law, when actually it has not. And this is surprising because some people don't know about this, and this is highly strategic because, for example, I mean, the United States has a federal data strategy, such as the EU's data strategy, but a strategy has not legal implications. It is different. So the United States has a strategy, but it doesn't have a federal data protection law. And actually the data protection principles are applied state by state within the United States. So for example, if California decides to implement a data protection law because of this reason, California will do it as the same way as Minnesota. But there is no cohesive single framework of laws concerning data privacy within the United States. And this is highly strategic because, for example, the European Union and the United States have had for some years a data governance framework jointly, which is called the EU-US Privacy Shield. However, in July this year, in July 2020, the European Union Court of Justice decided to ban in the short term this privacy shield because the European Union considered that actually the US was not abiding by all the principles of data protection and data privacy from the European Union. So I think this is very important. And secondly, considering that the United States doesn't have a federal data protection law, I think that, for example, next week we have the US presidential elections, and Biden, which is the Democrat candidate, has said that he would like to have not different standards like the Europeans. What does this mean? So Biden has not explicitly valued the EU's data protection rules, but at least he has said that he would like not to have different standards from those from the European Union. So this means something. But still we have to see who wins anyway. And I think that So the European Union and the United States have showed that both regions need each other. For example, in the case of the development of cyber norms at the United Nations, the shaping of internet governance at international forums, as I said before. But still, I find that in terms of data as an economic competitive tool, they have still some limitations. Because, for example, we see that Thierry Breton, which is the Commissioner for the Single Market, and Vestager, which is the Vice President for Competition, they are both promoting new rules to deter big tech companies from outside to have a finger, we will say, within Europe. So still, for example, the European Union and the United States could collaborate with regards to multilateralism through the cyberspace, through the internet. Still, they will have a ton of limitations with regards to economic competition. And I think this will be important. Well, very important.
Very much.
Fantastic,
We can
Raquel.
maybe imagine that it's like part of this Biden strategy explicitly explained by him can be part of the Brussels effect that Patricia has mentioned. But yeah, thank you very much for this answer.
Thank you. I don't think so either.
Fantastic, Raquel. Then Marcos Salleras, if you want to ask directly the question to Raquel.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much, Raquel, for explaining this. I think it's very interesting and it will become more and more relevant because data is what is one of the biggest assets in the market right now. So I was wondering, because I know that the Silk Road, the new Silk Road, it passes through Europe as well, namely through Greece, for example, and Italy as well, I think some parts. So how can the EU protect itself from Chinese influence in these areas of the EU? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you brought up a really interesting question because, for example, well, I think that Patricia talked about this article I wrote with a colleague from a think tank, and actually, what we wanted to say is that the European Union is trying to bring over all the member states' views and strategies on data governance and its extension on 5G, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. But still, there are some limitations because, for example, we see that in the case of Germany, the German parliament is still divided on how to act vis-a-vis China's implementation of 5G contracts. And for example, this is what I wanted to talk about with your question, is the fact that the European Union released this year a 5G toolbox, which laid out the foundations of how to similarly use and implement 5G across every country. And one of the main objectives was to make all member states to have the same approach vis-a-vis external companies that could have an interest in European countries. So one of the main principles is to make countries comply with a point which is called multi-vendor approach. So what does this mean? So each country has to promote that they are opening up an opportunity to everyone to offer their services, so that a country doesn't just rely on a specific company. And secondly, which is very important, this 5G toolbox from the European Union wants countries to prevent high-risk suppliers from interfering in national security concerns. So explicitly, the European Union didn't talk about China or US companies, but actually this toolbox really referred to highly advanced companies which come from outside the European Union. So while it didn't talk about explicitly Huawei or the Belt and Road Initiative, or for example, the US strategy, it is quite clear that the EU referred to these both parts of the world.
Thank you very much, Raquel.
Fantastic. Next would be Valeria Fappani.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, Raquel, for this very, very interesting presentation. I just want to bring this topic to to our reality, to our present days. And I'm really curious, and so I wanted to ask if the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the EU data governance or the data digitalization processes in some way, and if yes, how? Thank you.
Thank you. So actually, the pandemic, what has done not only the European Union but also in all over the world, is to accelerate the process of digitalization, and this has made concretely the European Union to go quick with the need of collaboration, cooperation, and also coherence, which is a very important principle within the European Union, and even coherence is a principle, I think, of the Treaty of the European Union. So this means that digitalization has also been a driver of one of the main principles of the EU. In terms of coherence. Why? Because, for example, during the pandemic, we have seen that one of the main challenges of the EU with regard to data governance is disinformation. And since disinformation is being monitored from 2015, the European Union considers that there have been around 8,000 campaigns on disinformation, but 25% of all this 5-year period has been performed in 4 months during the pandemic. So this is a lot. This is a lot. So this means that in 5 years, this is too much. So in 5 years, the 25% of the total of disinformation campaigns have been made during this year. So one of the main challenges for the European Union has to be to fight against disinformation. But disinformation doesn't come just externally, it also comes from within. So from Spain, from Italy, from Germany, from individual hackers, from groups, etc. And so the first challenge for the European Union has been to enhance the digitalization skills on disinformation. And what does this mean? So this means formation and training for all people, not just technical experts or social science experts on the internet, but also people that, for example, our grandparents that do not understand about how the internet works. So this means that the European Union is investing quite a few millions of euros in the reskilling of population. And what does this mean? So this means that you have to train people from the very primary level of education. So when you are 6-7 years old. And the second point of how the pandemic has accelerated this digitalization and data governance framework is with regards to data privacy, because we have seen that European countries have tried to standardize their COVID-19 apps, and there have been some confrontations with regards to, do we prefer a centralized model, do we prefer a decentralized model? And there were some countries that opted for the centralized model, which means that it is mainly the government who controls and monitors all the data by ensuring that all data is available for all the country, for the entire country. And other countries have opted for the decentralized model, which ensures more and which complies more with the data privacy principles. So it has been a kind of descent in this regard. And third, one of the positive outcomes of the pandemic, which is still ongoing, is that Ursula von der Leyen, so the president of the European Union Commission, said that in its discourse on the State of the European Union, said that Europe has entered into the decade of digitalization, of the digital Europe. So von der Leyen said that they will launch a new, for example, digital ID. So a common platform on ID digitally for the entire European Union. It said as well that the rural areas need to be more digitalized than before, because for now still just 40% of rural areas have broadband networks, and this is very important because this means that 60% of rural areas do not have broadband networks. So more than half of people do not have access to a quick internet. And yes, that's what I wanted to say. So 3 main points: so disinformation, digital skills, and as well public digital services.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Fantastic, Valeria. The next is Paolo Cacciato.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And I would like to thank you for this very impressive, short but impressive webinar today. I would like to ask just an opinion to Raquel. I'm a sinologist and I work at university and as director also of an observatory for market relations between Europe and China. And I think that considering the current situation about the pandemic era, the relation between data protection and technological infrastructure is very, very important, as we can see about the tracing methods about the control, the check on pandemic virus. So we know that in China, in Korea, for example, the tracing method was very successful, according maybe with some, laws or usage of data that allows the government to have strict control on people, okay? So Chinese people, they came back to buy in the malls in China quickly because they know that if they go to the malls, it's safe there because everybody controls them. If there is a case of virus spreading there, everybody immediately knows that. In Italy, for example, I'm calling from Milan, we know that the protection, the data protection law concerning our software, our application for the tracing method was a failure. So I would like, I don't know, because we have a totally different method and parameters for considering the value of the privacy on the data as well. So I would like to know, according with Raquel's opinion, if you think that this situation will create a new environment for implications that is going to be between the laws, the value of the data in privacy terms, in privacy perspective, and commercial, social, economical results that came out from these, more harmonic relation between these 3 parameters. So I don't know if I explain properly my question, because I'm seeing we are suffering a lot this condition between a different perception of data and privacy connected with data in the implication that this consideration has with softwares, application. We can boost the digitalization a lot, but if we don't change maybe some parameters of considering the implication that digitalization can have for our lives, maybe the results will be always lower comparing with compared with China, Korea, and Far East situation. Thank you for your opinion.
Thank you, Paolo. So I think that you brought up a really good question, because I think that actually the point is not if a centralized government makes better this pandemic management than perhaps a non-centralized government. I think the point is that actually China, South Korea, Singapore, and Japan were already prepared for the pandemic even before the pandemic started, because for example, by the beginning of the 2000s, we saw that most of some Asian countries were affected by other pandemics, such as SARS, etc. So all of them were were obliged to digitalize all their services, while in the case of Europe or the United States, no one was prepared in that regard. And it was with the beginning of the pandemic where actually all European countries needed to do all these apps and adapt all these data privacy principles to a really quick pandemic that popped up, not surprisingly, but unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And I think that in that regard, the point is not if a government is more centralized or non-centralized. The point is that if a government was already prepared for this digitalization challenge with the pandemic. So, for example, and I think that you all can have a look at this because it's really interesting. The OECD released this month the first ever digital government index, and there you can see that there are several indicators, and one of the indicators refers to the way in which citizens have a proactive participation in the government decision making on data and digitalization. So perhaps this is not very indicative of how a government could prepare for a new wave of the pandemic, but actually it can give you some tips.
Thank you.
Fantastic. The last question will be by Malvina Montini.
Hello. Hi, Raquel, and thank you very much for your presentation and webinar. It was really inspiring and interesting, of course. And I have a question about the 5G, because still in May I had to write a report for my university about the 5G question in Europe, and the fact that still by now China is really strong in the 5G, US is not so strong as they think, and UE is like in the middle, but is not able to decide if you want to stay with China or with the US for this quest, for this situation, for this stuff. And then we had the COVID-19, and there was a sort of stop about all this 5G stuff, because in Europe, for example, the Huawei was starting to have some contacts with the European Union, but then there was a stop because of the COVID-19. And so the UE before the COVID, there were this 5G toolbox, but also this 5G toolbox is a little not so clear, because like every country of European Union has to, as always, have to decide on its own what to do with the tools that the European Union give to them about this 5G. So I wanted I want to ask you to explain maybe more about the situation now. We still have the COVID, and so everything is still stacked. But if we have a sort of something new, something else to say about the 5G, because I'm still stuck in May, and just that. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your webinar.
Thank you, Malvina. So 5G is always a changing issue, but actually sometimes the way in which 5G evolves doesn't correspond to the speed in which governments adapt to the new challenges of 5G, right? So, for example, as I said before, we say that European countries do not always have the same point of view or outlook on how to act vis-a-vis 5G proposals from external companies which do not belong to the European Union. And this is still a problem because, as I said, for example, France has decided to ban Huawei from all French services on 5G. France did an auction 3 weeks ago, more or less, and it decided to give the 5G implementation across France to Orange. Orange is a French company. And actually this was really interesting because France did this process in 4 or 5 days, while, for example, in the case of the United States or in the case of Italy, it has taken around 20, 30 days. So this means that France did want to do this very quickly. And this is because, and this is why it is really interesting to see how France is always promoting the European way of thinking, the European way of working, etc. On the contrary, we have the case of Germany. The German parliament is still a bit divided on how to work with external companies on 5G. So there is one part of the parliament which is more focused on 5G as a national security concern, and there is another side which is more concerned about 5G as an economic driver, right? For example, we have seen that Italy is now preparing some collaborations with the China's Belt and Road Initiative, and there is still no information on 5G, but it will be quite interesting if you like it to have a look at how Italy will react in this regard, because I think it will be very highly important. And then, for example, in the case of Spain, the National Intelligence Center, which is kind of the CIA in the United States. So the National Intelligence Center in Spain said, according to a technical report, that Huawei didn't represent a threat or a concern to Spanish national security. So we see that every country has different outlooks on 5G, and especially on the way in which 5G is provided by external companies. And here is the case, and here it's very important to point out how Nokia and Ericsson, which are the two European most important companies on 5G, are reacting to this involvement of external companies. So, for example, Nokia and Ericsson have gotten one of the most important 5G contracts with Canada and with some Latin American countries. For example, Nokia is collaborating with Uruguay with regard to 5G interconnectivity of urban and rural areas in Uruguay. Nokia and Ericsson are also helping out the Canada's Supercluster initiative that has 5 main clusters. 2 of them are related to digital technologies and scalability of artificial intelligence. So Nokia and Ericsson are helping these 2 clusters to improve their replicability, interoperability, and deployment across the country. But still, I personally feel that Nokia and Ericsson still have some limitations to offer their own services to the European Union members themselves, because Nokia and Ericsson 5G capabilities are really good, but actually they do not have the same level of capabilities than, for example, the case of Huawei from China. And even more, Huawei offers a really cost-effective product, and this really attracts European countries because it's not that expensive. So I think that in that regard, the European Union, as now, it is trying to promote this digital sovereignty. I think that I personally think that the European Union will work a bit further on how they could promote, in the same way as it is promoting European cloud computing for European providers, for European people. I think the European Union will try to find new pathways to promote this 5G competition within Europe, for Europe, and by Europe. But we'll see.
Thank you very much for your reply. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Raquel. We'll stop here because it's more than enough. It's nearly, it's in 1 hour. We're very punctual. Thank you, Raquel. It's been a pleasure to have you as a guest speaker, and also to see so much engagement and proactivity coming from the audience. We were really expecting to have this kind of engagement with you. Our next webinar will take place on the 14th of November, where we'll talk about Chinese investments with a very special guest. So more information will be published on our website and our social media accounts. So hope to see you there very soon, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining us today.